Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're opening a source file that traces a direct, and I have to say, horrifying line between a certain kind of political malfunction and actual kinetic warfare.
Right.
Our focus is on what I think is the most devastating structural failure of modern history. It's about how the failures of democratic leadership, well, they create the space necessary for pure aggression,
That's the mission today.
for a devastating war of conquest.
We're looking at some very recent source material from the BBC, and it focuses on a specific, almost unbelievable moment.
Right.
The simultaneous occurrence of so-called peace talks in Florida and, at the same time, Russian mass atrocities on the ground in Ukraine.
So this deep dive, for you, the listener, is really designed to show you what happens.
Yeah.
What happens when populist self-interest just breaks the strategic systems that have, for decades, kept some kind of global stability.
And that's the causal link we're tracing. The election of a populist anomaly, a figure who never belonged in politics in the world's most powerful democracy.
And the result.
And the direct result, the erosion of the international order. That erosion is precisely what enabled a mafia-state to launch a full-scale, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine.
We're going to be distilling the key takeaways from these sources, and they really do reveal these deep structural vulnerabilities.
And we have to be absolutely clear from the very beginning. Let's establish full moral clarity.
Please.
Ukraine did not choose this war. It is the victim of aggression. Russia is the sole aggressor here, conducting a brutal war of conquest against a sovereign nation.
And what we were analyzing is the price the entire world pays when the superpower that was designed to uphold global norms, well, it starts to operate on personal transactions instead of principled statecraft.
Okay.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. Section 1, the populist shadow in diplomacy.
Right.
We have to start at the top of the system because this is about how the mere presence of an unorthodox, a politically compromised negotiating team in these high-stakes talks,
Yeah.
it just signaled a fundamental fracture.
It's all about signaling and institutional integrity, or the lack of it.
In the West's credibility and unity.
When the Kremlin is assessing the West's strength, it's not just looking at troop numbers, it's not looking at budgets, it's looking at the internal coherence, the predictability of its main adversary, the United States.
And when you look at who was actually involved in these talks, detailed in our source material, talks about ending a major European war.
Yeah, the profile of the negotiators is it's immediately alarming to any professional diplomat anywhere in the world.
So the source material, it details this phone call that Ukrainian President Zelensky had. It's described as very constructive.
Right, after 3 days of talks down in Florida.
But the focus for us, and this is what you have to really zero in on, is who was actually leading the American side in these discussions.
And the answer is telling.
It wasn't the State Department.
No, not even close. Zelensky was speaking to Donald Trump's personal envoy, a man named Steve Witkoff, and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
So these are people defined by one thing.
Personal loyalty, direct personal loyalty to this populist anomaly.
By trade, they're transactional players, real estate developers.
Right. Political advisors. They are not career diplomats who are, steeped in international law or treaties or the complex history of NATO.
And yet suddenly, there they are.
Suddenly, they're leading discussions on the fate of an invaded sovereign nation, and they're just bypassing decades of institutional expertise to do it.
So if you're bypassing the established channels, the State Department, what message does that send to the rest of the world?
Well, that's the thing. This shift from institutional expertise to just personal loyalty, it's evidence of what we're calling backroom games with a mafia-state.
That's the analytical conclusion here.
It is. It's what so many observers in the source material concluded. It just symbolizes the hollowing out of traditional diplomatic institutions.
And when the global community sees this, especially our allies in Europe, and maybe more importantly, our adversaries like Moscow,
when they look at the United States engaging in this kind of process, they don't see the enduring, predictable commitment of the State Department.
No, they see.
They see private citizens with personal political agendas, with loyalty debts. This is instability, but it's weaponized.
And the aggressor state suddenly has a back channel.
Exactly. A back channel to influence policy through personal leverage instead of having to go through the predictable complexity of the actual government.
And we have to be clear, this wasn't a one-off event. This has to be viewed in the larger context of this populist anomaly's time in office.
It was a pattern.
It systematically laid the groundwork for this aggression. The pattern was so clear. Openly admiring strong men, relentlessly attacking his own democratic institutions,
The intelligence community, the Justice Department.
the free press, and at the same time, consistently weakening or just outright insulting our democratic allies all across Europe and Asia.
And that pattern sent an unmistakable, incredibly powerful signal to Moscow.
What was the signal?
It showed that the West, anchored by the U.S., was divided. It was distracted by its own internal chaos, and, critically, that it would be slow to act decisively on the world stage.
So that signal, that paralysis of Western deterrence,
It was the necessary precursor to the full-scale, unprovoked invasion. The Kremlin read that internal institutional chaos as a window of opportunity.
a window opening wide.
And they believed the U.S. would either be unwilling or just incapable of mounting a unified, sustained response.
Which brings us directly to the first major structural impact. Let's call it domino effect 1. Loss of trust. The very act of Trump's team leading these key peace talks, instead of established diplomats, it contributes profoundly to this loss of trust between the United States and Europe.
Of course it does. I mean, why would you, if you're a European leader who relies on shared norms and predictable alliances, why would you trust an approach that's being managed by people whose only qualification is personal proximity to a single volatile political figure?
You can't.
You can't. And frankly, you shouldn't. And Moscow relies heavily on that exact division.
It's the chaos that aggressors crave.
It is. When the world's most powerful democracy operates on transactional self-interest instead of institutional stability, it generates that specific type of chaos. It leads to the normalization of authoritarian narratives where, loyalty trumps law.
And personal deals override treaties.
For the Kremlin, which, let's be honest, operates like a criminal syndicate, this signals that the rules are now pliable. The path forward for them involves exploiting personal vulnerabilities within the U.S. political structure.
Let's drill down into one specific detail from the source, because I think it perfectly captures the impossible position Ukraine was in.
Okay.
Zelensky himself said that during these talks, they discussed how to ensure that Russia stuck to any potential deal.
Just think about that.
It wasn't a conversation about celebrating peace. It was an active admission that the aggressor has zero respect for any agreement.
That detail is a searing indictment of the entire process. It highlights the foundational, necessary distrust here.
The Ukrainians know who they're dealing with.
They know they are negotiating with a party, this Mafia-State, whose word is meaningless. I mean, they have a track record of launching a full-scale, unprovoked invasion and committing war crimes over and over again.
And at the same time, they're seeking security guarantees from an American team whose own credibility is structurally compromised from the start.
And the message received by the Kremlin is simple. If the U.S. is willing to operate outside of its own institutional guardrails, well, then Russia is certainly free to act in bad faith.
The whole process is tainted.
From the start. It prioritizes political spectacle over enduring security.
So this political theater, it's doing more than just compromising the talks. It's actively empowering the aggressor.
It is. The signal is that personal connections and transactional influence now trump stable statecraft. And that is a direct green light for cynicism and bad faith from the aggressor state.
It tells Moscow just wait it out.
Or exploit this particular political faction, and you can get a better deal than you ever could through principled diplomacy.
And here is where we have to pivot. We pivot to the devastating kinetic consequences. This shows the immediate, horrifying contrast between those polite words spoken in Miami and the reality on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah.
This takes us to Section 2, the deadly juxtaposition, war crimes during peace.
This juxtaposition is really the defining moral and strategic heart of the source material.
The cost in human terms.
It is. And the sources make it brutally clear. Russia continued its airstrikes overnight, specifically hours after Zelensky had concluded his very constructive phone call with the U.S. negotiators.
There's no pause.
No reciprocal de-escalation, no goodwill gesture to, facilitate the talks. There was only relentless, calculated aggression designed to create maximum psychological leverage.
We have to detail the specific Russian aggression that took place. We are talking about the massive strike on the city of Kremenchuk.
Yeah. The mayor of Kremenchuk, Vitaly Maletsk, he called it a massive combined strike on essential infrastructure early on a Sunday morning.
And this wasn't just some random act.
No, this was a substantial, deliberate act of terror. And it speaks volumes about the Kremlin's actual intentions regarding any negotiated settlement.
In Kremenchuk, it's a major industrial hub. It's in the Poltava region. It's not even on the primary front lines.
And the reports from the ground confirmed just horror. The city sustained damage that cut off essential services, water, electricity, and critically, heat for a huge number of citizens.
In freezing conditions.
In freezing conditions. It shows a calculated, profound indifference to civilian life.
And this is the point where our analysis has to be really sharp and clinically precise. This cannot be dismissed as collateral damage.
Absolutely not. It's a clear, deliberate attack on civilians and on civilian infrastructure, which, under the Geneva Conventions, constitutes a clear war crime.
An act of state terror.
An act of state terror. And we have to emphasize the context that the source provides here. Kremenchuk has been repeatedly targeted since the full-scale, unprovoked invasion began in February 2022.
So it's a pattern.
It's a systematic targeting of civilian hubs, especially ones that control critical utilities like heating and water in the winter. It demonstrates a campaign of strategic cruelty.
The military goal isn't military.
No. The goal is not to defeat a military unit. The goal is to inflict civilian suffering, to break the will of the population, and to pressure the government during these very sensitive negotiations.
The timing, it perfectly illustrates these Mafia-State tactics at play.
It does.
The source notes that the aerial assaults and these acts of terror have continued even as efforts to negotiate an end to the war have intensified.
This simultaneous action is the definitive proof. It's proof that the negotiations for the Kremlin are a strategic facade. They're not a path to compromise.
So when we analyze Russia as a mafia state,
we're pointing out that its foreign policy apparatus does not operate on diplomatic norms. It operates on criminal principles.
They don't have diplomats.
They have no real diplomats, only conciliari. They behave like lieutenants in a criminal syndicate, applying maximum pressure through violence and extortion.
So their negotiation strategy is simple.
Talk peace in Miami, while you increase the violence on the ground to gain leverage.
It's the absolute pinnacle of cynicism. They leverage the distraction of peace talks.
Especially talks that are brokered by these easily influenced political outsiders.
While they bomb hospitals or power plants.
Right. And the source mentions Russia's simultaneous claim to have shot down 77 Ukrainian drones in several locations during this period.
It just showcases the ongoing relentless aggression that operates in perfect parallel with this supposed peace process.
And that duality, that's the critical insight for you, the listener. The Kremlin is not seeking an end to the war. They are seeking submission on terms dictated by force.
And these talks in Miami.
The talks in Miami, brokered by politically compromised figures, they serve a profound strategic dual purpose for the Mafia-State. First, it legitimizes their aggression by forcing the world, particularly the U.S., to engage diplomatically while they're actively committing war crimes.
So it normalizes their status.
And second, and this is maybe more important, it deepens the existing divide within the Western alliance. It proves that the U.S. is willing to entertain backroom deals managed by personal loyalists, even as Ukraine bleeds.
Which brings us right back to the failure of deterrence.
Yes.
The breakdown of institutional integrity, enabled by years of populist rhetoric that questioned the value of alliances, that degraded American commitment to global stability. It directly paved the way for this calculated cynicism.
Moscow correctly gauged that the cost of continued war, even with mounting atrocities, would be tolerated by a superpower that was distracted and internally conflicted.
To put a finer point on it,
the Kremlin understands the difference. They know the difference between dealing with career professionals who prioritize things like NATO unity and international law, and dealing with transactional figures whose primary motivation is personal political gain.
The latter are exploitable.
They are exploitable. The fact that this massive combined strike on Kremenchuk happened just hours after constructive talks, it just reinforces the aggressors' calculated decision that there would be no immediate unified institutional backlash from the American side.
The system was broken.
And they acted accordingly.
So let's shift now. Section 3. Behind Ukraine's back sees way, the dirty deals.
Right.
Because the structural problem here isn't just who was talking, but the very nature of these negotiations. It's a power dynamic that reflects those broken systems we've just been discussing.
And the victim nation risks having its fate decided without its full consent.
We have to critically analyze the framework of these discussions. The source describes them as detailed Ukraine-U.S. talks in Miami aimed at drafting a peace settlement acceptable to both sides.
Acceptable to both sides. We also know the White House was pushing Kiev and Moscow to agree to some kind of multi-point plan, but the source says with little sign of a breakthrough.
The very concept of a multi-point plan, often defined by outside powers, immediately suggests that Ukrainian agency is being limited.
It does.
And you see Zelensky's determination to keep working in good faith with the American side, covering key points that could ensure an end to the bloodshed. It just shows the profound dilemma that the victim nation is in.
They have to engage, even if they suspect the motives of the outside players or the structural constraints that are being placed on them. If they refuse, they risk being isolated.
So this is the critical insight, right? This U.S.-led process often functions as negotiations being held over Ukraine's head.
Or at least with significant external pressure. The fact that these high-level discussions are happening while mass atrocities are being committed on the ground, it just demonstrates a profound erosion of strategic red lines.
The moral floor of the whole process has just collapsed.
It has. When the parties fail to demand an immediate stop to war crimes as a precondition for any dialogue, the floor is gone.
And this erosion of trust is cemented by one key piece of information in the source material.
The Witkoff trip.
The fact that Trump's envoy, Witkoff, had just returned from talks with Putin at the Kremlin a few days earlier. And those talks also failed to produce a breakthrough.
That piece of intelligence is the smoking gun of this entire section. You have the populist envoy engaging directly with the aggressor, behind the scenes, outside of established diplomatic channels.
Channels that would normally include
the U.S. ambassador, the State Department, and, most importantly, the victim nation's direct input. This is the definition of decisions being discussed without the victim nation having full visibility.
Or, at best, they have severely limited input, knowing their fate is being shaped by people who prioritize transactional politics and personal benefit over a principled defense.
The implication of this back-channel diplomacy is massive. Why would you fly directly from the Kremlin to Miami to meet with the Ukrainians?
It suggests the Kremlin saw an opportunity.
A huge one. To leverage personal connections within the U.S. power structure to achieve strategic gains without making any genuine institutional concessions to NATO or to Ukraine.
They're trying to get a political solution that just bypasses the established geopolitical frameworks.
So the core analytical takeaway for Moscow is that this paralysis of Western deterrence,
which is shown by the willingness of the U.S. to engage in these shady deals made for personal benefit through these unofficial envoys.
It was interpreted as a massive green light. A green light for further Russian aggression and acts of terror.
When they see a non-traditional actor flying to the Kremlin one day and then leading the talks with Ukraine the next,
they interpret that as weakness.
Right.
As opportunism, as a lack of unified, principle-driven resistance across the Atlantic Alliance. It validates their whole thesis. The rules of international law no longer apply if you can just talk your way past them using political influence and personal favors.
The source also details the joint statement issued after the Miami talks.
Right.
The U.S. and Ukrainian negotiators urged Russia to show a serious commitment to long-term peace.
The fact that you have to urge them to be serious?
It just underscores the fundamental cynicism of the Russian approach. It confirms, analytically, that Russia has shown no such commitment to peace, only to coercion.
And this leads to the fundamental instability of the whole thing. The negotiators, Witkoff and Rustem Umerov, they claimed they agreed on the framework of security arrangements and discussed necessary deterrence capabilities.
But you have to ask the critical question.
What deterrence capability can actually be sustained if the principal broker, the populist anomaly's representative, is at the same time undermining the traditional alliances and institutions you need to enforce that deterrence?
The structure is unstable from the start.
You cannot build a durable peace on personal trust or transactional favors. It requires the weight of institutions and international consensus. And when the U.S. willingly compromises those institutions, any resulting peace framework is instantly fragile. It's disposable.
And this transactional approach, it creates a diplomatic vacuum that has to be filled.
It does.
If Washington is signaling unpredictability, who steps up? And the answer, as we see in our sources, is Europe, which leads us directly to the pushback. The instability is palpable when we shift our focus to Section 4, broken alliances and the European pushback. This is where we see the fractured Western Front trying to reestablish some kind of order in response to these U.S.-led, unorthodox negotiations.
This movement reveals the true damage done to NATO unity. This is what we could call domino effect, too.
The contrast is so sharp, it's analytically important. While the U.S.-led effort, driven by these unorthodox negotiators, is pushing for a multi-point plan that some European allies see as, well, appeasement.
Or at least rushed and ill-conceived.
Europe is reacting with this determined push to shore up their own long-term commitments.
The strong European pushback against the early versions of this U.S.-led peace plan is a direct institutional response. It's a response to the lack of credibility and trust created by this populist foreign policy approach.
Our source mentions that European leaders, specifically French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, and the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, they're all set to hold talks in London.
And they're seeking to win support for their own proposals, more robust proposals. It reflects a structural necessity for them to move beyond total reliance on what could be a volatile and capricious American policy.
So this is the damage to NATO unity, but it's also the adaptation that follows the damage.
Exactly. Europe fundamentally realizes that it cannot rely solely on the U.S. for strategic clarity or long-term commitment when the U.S. diplomatic machine is being run by political loyalists, not foreign policy professionals who stick to predictable norms.
So they're building a new architecture.
Effectively, yes. Separate from the immediate politically charged U.S. effort, they're focusing their collective energy on tangible, enforceable, long-term security guarantees for Kyiv.
So let's detail those European counterproposals. What exactly are they aiming for? How are they strategically different from the U.S.-led plan?
The European proposals are focused on establishing a robust, sustainable security architecture for a post-war Ukraine, one designed to make a second Russian full-scale invasion impossible.
What's that include?
It includes comprehensive security guarantees, so binding commitments that go way beyond just declarations of support, and significantly, the possibility of establishing a multinational peacekeeping force on Ukrainian territory.
That signals a real commitment to physical deterrence.
It's based on the understanding that Russia only respects clear military red lines that are enforced by a multinational military presence, not just diplomatic rhetoric.
This sounds far more concrete, far more long-term than the transactional approach we saw being discussed in Miami.
It is.
The UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has specifically pushed for a coalition of the willing.
A loose collection of allies committed to underwriting Kyiv's defense to deter a second invasion. He calls this approach vital for long-term security.
And that term, coalition of the willing, is strategically important here, isn't it?
It is, because it represents an end run around the paralysis caused by U.S. political unpredictability.
So if NATO is gridlocked,
a coalition of the willing allows proactive nations to bypass the bureaucratic and political gridlock that can happen, especially if key members are signaling weakness or transactional self-interest.
it's an acknowledgement that when the U.S. retreats or just becomes structurally unreliable,
Other democracies have to step forward decisively to fill that void and reestablish credible deterrence. The goal is clear. Make the cost of a future Russian invasion so high that it becomes definitively prohibitive.
this whole movement, it demonstrates the systemic recovery efforts that are underway in the face of a systemic shock.
Yes, Europe is mobilizing its own diplomatic resources to create stability where the U.S. had previously created instability.
But how does the Mafia-State respond to this? To a sign of genuine, unified deterrence, this move toward clear, physical red lines like a peacekeeping force.
Predictably. With immediate and severe aggression and defiance, Vladimir Putin has already rejected the idea of such a peacekeeping force.
He stated it unequivocally.
That any troops deployed would be considered legitimate targets. This is a direct, chilling escalation point that tries to neutralize this emerging European resolve before it can even consolidate.
That is a direct, open threat. It's aimed not just at Ukraine, but at the military forces of the Western powers trying to stabilize the region.
It's a deliberate testing of these new red lines.
And the analysis of this response is straightforward, isn't it?
It is. The aggressor only respects strength and clear, established red lines. The initial period of the populist anomalies administration created the perfect conditions for the normalization of authoritarian narratives.
By questioning alliances, cozying up to strongmen.
Exactly. And it led directly to this profound erosion of strategic red lines. So now, when Europe tries to rebuild those lines with the concrete idea of a peacekeeping force, the aggressor feels empowered to issue direct, kinetic threats against international forces.
This escalation is really the final piece of the puzzle.
It is.
It confirms that the preceding years of Western institutional weakness and self-interest were interpreted by the Kremlin not as some temporary distraction, but as a permanent license for aggression.
And the bill for that systemic failure is now being tallied in how difficult and dangerous it is to establish genuine peace.
Absolutely. The very need for a coalition of the willing just underscores the extent of the damage.
When traditional institutions falter because of internal political chaos, the response has to be innovative, multilateral, and ultimately it has to be grounded in military and financial commitments strong enough to overcome the aggressors' learned cynicism.
The European focus on long-term security guarantees and a peacekeeping force shows a crucial realization.
You cannot negotiate an end to a war of conquest.
Yeah.
You have to deter the continuation of it.
And the fact that we're seeing this high-level, urgent European coordination at the same time as the transactional talks in Miami is it's evidence of this damaged strategic landscape.
The U.S. is essentially negotiating against its own allies' best interests by entertaining deals that don't have the institutional weight required for a lasting peace.
So the ultimate takeaway of this structural analysis
Is that the moment democratic unpredictability takes hold, the world order shifts violently. The aggressor's interpretation of this internal chaos leads to kinetic results. The bombing of Kremlin while peace is being discussed, the issuing of direct threats against international peacekeepers, and the fracture of alliances that now have to urgently seek new, stronger architectures for deterrence.
As we conclude this deep dive, we have to turn our focus one last time to the horrifying, relentless consequences on the ground in Ukraine.
We have to.
We detailed the massive combined strike on Kremenchuk, but that is just one example. The reality is cities destroyed, families killed and displaced, mass graves, and the profound trauma of a nation fighting for its very existence.
This is the true, bloody price of systemic failure.
And we maintain our unrelenting analytical focus here. Russia is the aggressor. What they do are war crimes and acts of terror against a victim nation.
And this point cannot be overstated. We began by tracing this specific structural causal link, and we end by staring at the consequences of institutional collapse.
Populism is not harmless.
It is not entertainment. It is not merely a protest vote. It has real-world, measurable, kinetic effects that reshape global security.
And democracies, they don't fall in a single dramatic moment.
No. They fall through a slow chain of bad choices, a consistent refusal to prioritize institutional integrity over personal political gain, and a failure to take global danger seriously.
The specific actions we've detailed in this deep dive, from the high-level talks being run by unqualified political operatives to the deliberate and calculated bombing of civilian infrastructure in Kremenchuk.
These are the real-world manifestations of populist self-interest overriding global security and institutional norms.
The failure to maintain moral and diplomatic consistency provided the structural weakness necessary for a massive international crime, the full-scale unprovoked invasion of a sovereign nation, to even occur.
It granted the aggressor state the confidence that the West would be too divided, too internally chaotic, or just too distracted by its own political theater to mount a decisive, unified, and sustained institutional response.
This is the normalization of authoritarian narratives, realized in practice.
It is.
And that instability, as the source material hints, is reflected globally. It shows the breadth of this systemic failure.
Yeah, the BBC source mentions other events happening at the same time that confirm this structural breakdown. The Chernobyl radiation shield losing its safety function after a drone strike.
North American leaders meeting to discuss trade while a major war is underway. Even domestic legal challenges like the one against U.S. birthright citizenship.
All of this confirms an overall state of profound global instability, and it's created by the erosion of strategic red lines and institutional focus.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener, beyond just the headlines?
It means that you have to understand that the erosion of strategic red lines in one place, say, the U.S. State Department, creates impunity for aggressors everywhere.
The moment a powerful democracy elevates short-term political self-interest above established democratic principles and international norms.
The system of checks and balances that protects the world begins its slow, costly dissolution.
And the bill for that institutional breakdown is always paid in human lives, shattered nations, and global imbalance.
The complexity of the diplomatic failures, the cynicism of the Mafia-State tactics, and the necessary, urgent European pushback. It all demonstrates that the consequences of allowing transactional politics to replace statecraft are immediate and devastating.
And we'll leave you with this final thought to explore on your own. What happens when this new security architecture that Europe is trying to build, this coalition of the willing, is fundamentally different from the structures the U.S. prefers?
The division created by the populist anomaly may be permanent, forcing the world to choose between two competing models of deterrence.
And this brings us to the hammer line.
A warning rooted in the analysis of the cost.
When a populist takes the wheel of a democracy, The crash is never local. Ukraine pays the price first, but the bill always reaches the rest of the world.